Yes, hello everyone. This is a pleasure to be here to make this podcast on space applications and innovation. We will talk about how to use space to the benefit of life here on Earth and how we are becoming increasingly dependent on the satellites in our daily lives. We might also touch a little bit upon rockets and exploration, but I can promise more on this in the next podcast on space. Today I'm with Kenneth Olafsen. He's the sales director at Congressworks Satellite Services. Pleasure for me to have you here, Kenneth.
Thank you, Bjørn Ottar. Very excited to be here. I think this is a nice opportunity to explain a little bit about what's happening in space these days. So give you a few brief notes on my background. I'm basically heading all our commercial activities of Kongsberg Satellite Services, which is more known as KSAT, in the Asia-Pacific region. I've been working in roughly 10 years in KSAT, focusing on how we can help satellite operators benefit more from the space infrastructure they have with getting the data back to ground, basically, and back home, and making use of their satellites. So,
Thanks, Kenneth. I think that was a very interesting introduction. So we'll come back to many of these aspects during the talk. I emphasize this is a personal talk, but of course we will talk about where we're coming from as well. But it's also a possibility to share thoughts and experiences we have also in Asia. We've been both working with India a little bit, and of course that is also a key player in the space arena. Just to set the scene a little bit, I talked about it a little bit already. We're talking about space applications, but what space applications and innovation, satellite data? That was certainly not where it all started. When it started in the 50s, it was more politics. It was the Sputnik, Soviet Union, the moon race with the landing in 1969. But below that, and at the same time, more or less, there were more and more application arenas. It started with satellite communication, the TV broadcasting. One of the first the games, Olympic Games, I think it was in Japan, was broadcasted with satellite communication. And of course, then later we got GPS and the European Galileo satellite navigation system, but also this area of Earth observation and how to look at Earth and how to gather data and how to use that in connection with other data. It's extremely exciting period we are in now, and I have an example actually here behind me. This is the first Norwegian satellite. It was launched in India in 2010, so I've been working for 10 years, so it should not have been worked more than 1 year before we declared a success, so it's a kind of a 10 times more than expected, so this is extremely exciting for me to be here. It was a great experience to be in India. We go back to the Indian experiences, but let's go a little bit now into this arena of new space. It's a new area now, a lot of new players, a lot of new people, a lot of new companies. And how do you work with these new entrepreneurs, and how are you able to work with the kind of the experienced companies and the new players at the same time?
As you mentioned, it was all government and then the agencies, and it was all political in the past. Now it's becoming a commercial scene, extremely commercial, and a lot of commercial interests. And then you see that this creates a lot of new ways to use the satellite data and the new ways to make basically space more cheaper and more accessible for more people, more nations, more companies to be involved. And AIS-SAT, as you have behind you, is a good example of a pretty low budget but still a very, very efficient tool for Norwegian government to use that satellite for ship tracking. That's kind of a direct consequence of the new space race. It's basically a new space race that we see, but it's not necessarily driven by political aspects. But the way we have been, and I have been working with this for the last 10 years, which we saw the kind of early beginning of new space, was a few companies in Silicon Valley that basically came from the IT and software industry and wanted to make satellites looking at the size of a fridge. In the past, they were the size of a bus, so it was a huge change and an interesting challenge that they were trying to make it all kind of off-the-shelf kind of commercial products that they put into the satellites to launch and actually make it work as good as any other 100 million or $1 billion satellite. So.
But can you actually do the same with these small satellites as you can with the big ones, or do you have to make more of them to do the same thing? Or
to a certain degree, you can do the same, yes, but you need a different infrastructure both on the ground and in space to do it. And the trend is going into the what we call the constellation game, where you have many small satellites instead of a few single big satellites. And there are pros and cons with this, but at least it's the cost of trying to make a business is much lower and more accessible. So you see normal companies, and Google was one of the first companies that actually was involved in owning satellites, and that was an interesting aspect, because we see why do these companies go into a space domain when they were normally doing living on an advertisement, basically.
Yes. Who will win this race? Is it
difficult to
Facebook, Elon Musk, or is it the Lockheed Martin Boeing, or is it the new players? So will we see all of them involved in the next 10 years?
A huge number of companies these days in many countries, but of course the driving force is in the US, I would say, and other countries are following in the same pace now. But what we see is a divergence of IT industry and space industry coming into a single domain, basically. And just the last 2 years, we have seen a big change in that the big cloud providers are now involved in space community, and Amazon, and recently Microsoft, and as I mentioned, Google, and many of the other IT companies are trying to do the same, because they probably see the need to get more data into their cloud and into their services. So for them, it's a game of access to data.
Yeah, they don't care whether it's a satellite or a launch. Basically, they just want data, right?
Data is the key, and say the information that you can extract from this, and fusing data from space applications or space data with other normal sensors, that you combine it and
is that
make
easy?
it a decision tool, basically.
Is that easy to combine space data? Is that solved, or is it
not at all solved? Quite complicated still. It is in the early stage of maturing the usage of space data. It's taken a long time to come from a niche specialist group that uses the space data to hopefully becoming more of a public usage of the data in the future.
Yes.
So this is next 5 years.
Basically, you are ready for all kind of development. You try to be versatile and robust to meet all kind of satellite solutions.
Yes, because we see that users of satellite data don't really care if it's coming from a satellite or from a certain type of satellite. It's all about what information can you extract.
Yes.
So now you have satellites making nice pictures of our planet, the optical satellites, and you have satellites seeing through clouds, and you have the ones that are receiving signals from ship. So there's a lot of different sources and applications that are of interest, and IoT is now another kind of buzzword in the industry, but that's also interesting because a lot of IoT sensors are in remote areas of the world where you can't easily access the data. So
you have ideas now for IoT satellite communication systems, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, if you want to go into some areas, just to be a little bit more concrete on the arena, I think you mentioned ship detection. Maybe you can say a little bit more about maritime surveillance. There are applications in the forest and in the agriculture industry, all kind of industry, insurance. Everyone, it's relevant for all industries, right? I mean, if you don't have the satellite into your business equation, that is a risk in itself.
It's becoming an important tool for any company or industry or say public institution that needs to do analysis of what's going on in society. So it's space. Say a day without space data, it's you won't be able to do much on your phone or your laptop, or it's we all know that from the early days of broadcasting and TV, but it's unimaginable, basically, what we are not able to do without it. And that means there are a lot of other opportunities.
So we are all kind of satellite users, right? Without
knowing it.
Knowing it.
We don't realize it in the daily life. But there's a lot of interesting new developments also on how to use the data. But I think ship detection and the traditional way of using data has been, at least for, say, maritime nations like Norway, to use those kind of unique sensors and data to monitor what's going on with the fishery fleet or illegal fishery and those kind of maritime activities. That has been going on operationally for 20-25 years.
And in this arena, for instance, even illegal fishing, for instance, you can actually almost pay your satellite with a couple of cases, right? More or less.
Yeah.
If it's a big case,
Yeah.
And you can use the satellite data as more or less evidence in the
it's basically used as evidence in court. Yes, you can more easily detect the polluter of an oil spill, exactly. And you can detect different kind of ship tracks to analyze what kind of illegal activity is going on, like transshipment, etc. So there's a lot of interesting, say, analysis being done to use it in a daily life of say a coast guard, for example.
Both for government and businesses. This is for both.
So for a business, it's relevant to know what's the ideal shipping route for going from A to B.
Yes.
And if you're in the Arctic with ice, it's even more important to analyze: is it a straight route or another route that makes more sense? So it's about saving life. It's about making more money for businesses, making better decisions. And
so even for the Earth explorers, like the people going to the North Pole, for instance, they need AIS, these kind of satellites, and navigation. And,
yes, so we have actually, there's a few cases in the past where KSAT also delivered satellite data directly to a few of the explorers going to the North Pole for demonstrating the different kind of say routes to the North Pole, and that's valuable information that they use.
They're very happy to have the satellites when they're on on their road.
So that's one good example. But agriculture is another important field that is being used widely.
This is a big
across
thing,
the globe,
right?
to look at when is the harvest season coming, when is the ideal time to do. Basically look at the crop monitoring. So it's a quite mature market as well, but there's a lot of other areas that hasn't taken into account the space data yet that has a huge potential, and that is typically in the financial industry, insurance. If you want to look at flood monitoring, consequences of a flood. A good example was the flooding that was in Thailand a few years back, where basically half of the world's hard disk production is made, and how does that affect the production facilities, and then of course insurance and the reinsurance markets, etc. But these people are not experts in analyzing satellite data, so there is a big task today to kind of bridge the gap between the non-space players with the space players, to make it understandable, basically, what they can see.
But it can also be a risk. You cannot just switch from an Earth data collection system to a satellite system. That's also a little bit risky. For instance, disaster management, you cannot just kind of cancel all the in situ or the local observation data with the satellite data. You have to combine it, right? That is the key.
Satellite is I would say it's a complementary tool for, let's say, for a coast guard. They want to know who's polluting or who's doing the illegal fishery. The satellite data that we provide in KSAT, for example, that in 10 minutes after we receive and analyze and process the data, that information can go to the coast guard to make a decision. Should they use their Coast Guard fleet to focus on this ship rather than this ship? So it's basically a more efficient use of the Coast Guard's resources.
Yes.
So it's definitely not a substitute. It's
and you can maybe avoid some investment in some planes if you want to kind of survey large maritime areas. You need to have a lot of planes, for instance. Satellites is much more efficient.
Yeah. So you optimize the use of government taxpayers' money, basically. So that way it's important.
That's why it kind of pays itself, at least the first ones.
Yeah.
Interesting, Kenneth. Thank you. So we've been mentioning maritime surveillance, agriculture. I think you mentioned one of the key applications. You can even now actually measure whether the Earth goes up and down with millimeter accuracy. So actually, this building, is it actually moving up or down? You can do that with a satellite.
Yes.
That is very interesting. With radar data.
Yes.
And also for investors. You don't want to invest in a building that kind of disappears.
Exactly. So that's another quite new use of practical urban development data in high-rise buildings or how to say, in a train track, for example. Is there a potential for a landslide in this area?
Exactly.
This is most people don't think about that.
No.
This is part of the analysis being done by
is new.
construction companies. And,
this was not what we talked about when I studied in the 90s. So this is definitely a new area, right?
Yeah. But maybe I can mention also another new development that just happened recently. It was the fact that the Norwegian government announced that they want to monitor globally all the basically tropical rainforest just a few weeks ago. And this was actually a contract that KSAT received from called NICFI, the Norwegian Climate Initiative, where there's a few commercial players involved that do have a lot of interesting satellite data that can actually solve the problem of monitoring deforestation on a global level. And this has never been done before at this scale, and Norwegian government is basically the first one to allocate money to do this kind of activity, and they also are the first in the world to publicly make the data available, and that's really an interesting aspect of what's happening in the industry, with a lot of the data coming from EU and now Norway also, and other sources of data are made free, so that the use of the data is more widely used.
So your role there is going to be a coordinator, and you kind of acquire the data from American and European players, and then you gather it and disseminate the data to everyone who wants to have it.
Yeah, so it's both a receive, process, analyze and disseminate.
Yes. But the satellites are not from Norway. This is a
global
kind
from,
of system, right?
From two companies, Airbus, which is the French, which most people think of aircraft. The other company is one of the kind of pioneering new space.
One of the new space players.
Companies called Planet from Silicon Valley area.
Yeah. Interesting. Interesting combination of companies.
They have the size of satellites as you have here. Basically, you can have it on your arm.
Yeah.
And now they have about 300 satellites in space, able to monitor a vast part of the planet every day.
One of the key challenges in the world now is the plastic, kind of polluting the seas with plastic. How can satellites help solve that problem? Do you have any idea, or do you think they can be part of it, or is it just a wild dream that we can kind of solve this problem with satellites?
Again, a good $1 million question. I wouldn't be sitting here if I had the answer, but it is a global problem for sure. There is a huge drive these days to try to find solutions, and I think satellite will definitely not be the only way to solve it, but it will be part of the solution probably. So there's a lot of initiatives these days on trying to find out how the satellites and what kind of sensors on the satellite can best be suited to detect and analyze the plastic in the sea. It's definitely not easy, but you
can measure the streams a little bit and things like that, but it's but it is I think it's not given that there is one single good solution today, but definitely this is an area where satellites can contribute. Where the space people and the other people have to come together to find a solution. Yeah, probably.
Yeah, definitely.
Otherwise, we wouldn't be sitting here.
So it's being worked on, and we're also involved in trying to analyze what can we do and in what way can we monitor this on a regular basis, because that's the kind of next step we see, that monitoring land has been done for a long time, but the sea area has been focused on ships and oil, but The plastic is definitely a new.
And it's small. It requires kind of even more advanced sensors, I think, than what we have now.
And then you need to work with
more
those
satellites.
that can. Well, after you detect it, you need to have a way to remove it. And that's another, say, difficult part as well, because who's responsible and who's going to pay for it. That is the tricky part. But I think every nation understands this is a big issue to solve.
So we need the best people, I think, to help solve that problem. I think so. Thanks, Kenneth, for that. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about issues relating to launching these satellites. You know, there is everyone maybe has. Everyone knows now that the Norwegian government has just released funding to build a spaceport at Andøya. This is a spaceport up in North Norway. Has been dealing with smaller rockets and launchers up till now, but now they have signed an agreement with a German company to launch this launch satellites like the ones from Planet from Andøya in not so many years. Other European rocket companies will probably join as well, and maybe also an American or two. But India, now we're going a little bit to India. India is emerging as a bigger space nation, I think, than it was in the past. You know, China has invested a lot, India has invested a lot, Europe and the United States. Do you know any Indian launchers that can actually be launched from Andøya? Is that something to think about?
That's something to consider, because there has been, for the last 3-4 years, I would say, been a quite big change in the number of Indian companies that commercially want to be part of this new space race. And I think there are 3 or 4 launch companies in India at the moment that have ambitions to launch. And they have had certain restrictions up until now on actually launching on Indian soil, because this has, coming back to the traditional part, how it has been done in India, it's been very much government-regulated space sector, where the Indian Space Agency had basically the only one having the mandate to do space activities, meaning launching satellites, building satellites, and operate it, and using the data. Of course, that has been done by anyone that has an interest in it in India, in terms of the institutes and scientists. But there is a big change in India these days to open up the space community for the commercial industry to participate. Launcher is one part of it, and there's quite a few interesting companies there that want to do things in India, but also have plans to launch from outside of India. And I think recently, even last week, one of them, they launched a kind of a MOU with Alaskan spaceport to consider launching from that location. So it is definitely a
candidate.
A candidate, and there's a race, as you mentioned, between different countries and locations around the world who are able to launch small satellites, because this is the market everyone is now targeting. So
there are more than 100 initiatives, I think, and of course not all of them will survive, but maybe 10 worldwide, and some of them hopefully will come to Norway.
Yeah. So in India, definitely there is a lot of interesting activities going on, and I think also in the terms of production and the IT industry, and how those industries can really be put together into the space domain, has a very interesting global reach, because there's so many companies these days that struggle with mass manufacturing satellites. It's still not a problem that is solved. To do that at a reasonable cost, and maybe that is also a niche for India to look into.
India has car industry, IT industry, space industry, so if you combine it together, they have enormous capabilities.
Yeah, they do. But there has been these regulatory constraints in the past.
This is a challenge. I mean,
now they open up with new initiatives by the government. So.
Yes, that's an interesting development. We will have to follow that the next years to come.
Yeah,
definitely. So we are approaching the end of the podcast now. I would just at the end here talk a little bit about how it is to work in India and some shared experiences. I was only there for 4 days to launch the satellites in the middle of the summer vacation. That was extremely interesting, extremely dynamic, this spaceport. But you have been there regularly, year or so. And what is your experience? And do you see any changes now in the attitude to find collaboration ideas and working together?
I think it's remarkably easy to work with them compared to the typical, say, stereotype aspects that is seen from, say, Western side. Working with India is complicated sometimes. That's the kind of general idea, that it's complicated and you need to understand their culture for sure, which applies for any country. But I think they have been extremely pragmatic in their approach to the space activities that India is handling for a long time now. They are extremely pragmatic in the way we support them and operate together and find good solutions. So we haven't not really experienced these cultural barriers that much actually. So, and I think it has probably something to do with the fact that the Indian Space Organization, ISRO, was established as a separate entity back in the days that reported directly to the Prime Minister's office without the kind of big bureaucracy that you have through different ministries, etc. in India that complicates things. So it was definitely a national strategic asset to have a well-functioning space organization. And that has been very successful from day one. And they keep launching satellites at a fraction of the price of most other agencies around the world. So they're very efficient, and I think it's in a way kind of a role model of what's possible to achieve with a relatively low budget. So I'm quite impressed by how they work, and their engineering skills are definitely one of the best in the world. They know how to launch, they know how to build satellites, and they keep being innovative, I would say, even as you would expect only the industry to be very innovative, but they keep doing small innovations all the time to improve the performance.
Very flexible, I would say. When we launched these satellites, we almost made adjustments all the way up to launch. That was very interesting to see how that actually worked. And we are a little bit lucky to work in the space arena, I think, because we're all kind of a family. Even if many people working in this industry now, we all have the same purpose to work in space and to build good satellites.
Yeah, I think we all kind of understand each other and what does it take to have a success for everyone. It's all about finding the kind of win-win situation for everyone, because it's all a relatively small community and we all need to collaborate.
Yes. Thanks, Kenneth. And now the final question, pointing a little bit to the future. We all know that in the start of the space arena, the best people, they worked with the space community. And we need the best people now. How can we address the interests of the younger people to work with space and space applications in all its facets? Do you have any idea? I know there are many good people now, but I think it's a competition now, right? Shall I go to the banking industry or the space industry? They are open, They are not so only think about going to the moon and Mars and all the things that was done in the 60s. It's now like, why should I work with space?
Yeah, I think there are two aspects to it, because we have seen that there's a huge interest in space these days, and I would say it's almost one and only because of Elon Musk in a way, because he has made an enormous attention with his projects in SpaceX, launching cars to space and landing part of their rockets down to Earth again. It all looks very magical, and people find that fascinating. And I think we need more of those kind of people that fascinates people and attract young people to go into the industry, because it has maybe in the past been seen as a quite traditional industry, but now you can come with any kind of background basically and contribute. You can be an engineer, a lawyer, or and there are ways to be a specialized space lawyer. If you are a space lawyer, you have a pretty good standing, because there's not many of them.
No.
And you can come from the normal IT industry, because there's a emergence now of technology between the space and the IT industry. So all the cloud providers mentioning earlier, you could have a cloud competence and be actually one of the important part of an organization to build build a space company. So
you're not too worried about kind of employing the talented young people?
Not really, but I think we still need, if you look at Norway, we don't have a lot of, say, space education and a large number of students that go into this field. So it's important that we have awareness in the media about this, and I think that has been quite a few media these days that keep writing and informing about space activities, and that's important, that it's in the daily life of people.
Yes. Okay. Thanks, Kenneth. I think we had a good discussion. Thank you for your contributions and elaborating on all these aspects. I think there is, I would conclude, at least with Kenneth's perspective, there is a bright future for both going to space on Earth, I say it, mission to planet Earth, and also other things that we will touch upon in the next podcast.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to talk about the fascinating parts of space and what it means for the future.